Okay, so my recording should be going. I know we've got a couple people gone, so I want to make sure to record. And is it connected, I hope? Good. So the first one was pretty easy, I thought. This probably feels like a long time ago for you guys. Taking a look at what's considered, from a receivable standpoint, how are they categorized? The first two are definitely a contributor to like the livelihood of the business. I got to get to the right page here, but sold merchandise on account, received a promissory note on account for services performed. The key there in B is services performed. So we did work, whether it was selling something or providing a service. That's why those two are receivables. The other one, C, advanced $10,000 to an employee. That is not for the livelihood of the business, so that's where it's considered other receivables. Okay. A promissory note tends to be longer in length and larger in value. Not that much larger in this case, but that's the difference between an AR and a notes receivable. What questions can I answer about that one? Pretty easy. Add notes as needed. Okay, in exercise 9.2, record the following transactions on the book of the RAS company. And they're basically just really simple, like here is what we sold on account. I had some nice little notes that I wanted to add. I made a little T account as I went and said, here's 17,200. It looks like we returned, or they returned. So of course they wouldn't owe that much anymore for a new balance of 13,400. And maybe you're good at just looking at that and remembering it when it comes time for them to pay their bill. I like a visual reminder. That helps me see where that 13,400 came from. It looks like if they paid within the discount period, this one happened to be 2%. We gave them a little bit of a deal. Remember, this is a contra revenue account because it's offsetting the actual money in our pocket. So that's really a snapshot from the first section of the chapter. Let's go on to talking about the balloons. Writing things off or popping the balloon, or using what's called the allowance, or what I call hopeful, by just deflating the balloon. If we have to reinflate that thing, it's a lot easier than reopening the account to turn around and have them pay the bill. So DART versus just letting the air out, okay? I see the word doubtful here, which I always say is hopeful. This is not a DART. It's still a bad debt expense. We are eating $31,000 worth of this ARs that are going to go bad, but instead of darting them with a balloon and saying we're done with you, we're just going to let the air out by $31,000 and just hope, hence hopeful, what we're calling doubtful accounts are going to actually pay their bill. Where did the $31,000 come from? I believe they just told you. The credit manager estimates that $31,000 of these receivables will become uncollectible. On $3 million worth of credit sales, that's actually not bad. That's a pretty tiny sliver. And then they asked you to prepare the current asset section of the balance sheet. Did they give it to you in a nice format? You had to write it in? Okay. What I'm mainly looking for, or what I want to be concerned with, is this chunk. So if you only did this chunk, I'm happy with that. And if you put everything on one line, like one of the options of the book did, that's okay too. It's just that the main number we're trying to get at is here. We had $600,000 left as a balance at the end of the year. Keep in mind we had $3 million worth of credit sales. but we knock, 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 bang down, kick down the door of all those ARs and figured out that, well, hey, we got it down to 600,000, but we really, someone, the credit manager, is saying out of that, we're probably not going to see 31,000 of it. So what's the actual realizable value? 569. On to the next one. At the end of 2014, Carpenter has AR of 700,000 and allowance for doubtful of 54,000. Okay, someone is not paying. We've called, we've kicked on the door, we've wrote letters. This Megan Gray, we're going to write her off. Okay, and it looks like she's got $6,200. So you're still going to see allowance for doubtful, but that, okay, so if I make AR, which is an asset, which is got a debit balance, allowance for doubtful is actually a contra asset, so it's going to be flipped. But when we flip that one more time, this is where I think it gets a little bit confusing. Okay, this is a contra account, contra asset account. So it acts opposite of an asset. Well, if we're going to take this and pop that balloon, we have to actually, and so this is a subtract. It's hard because we're thinking about an asset, so it's almost like we're putting it back into the asset camp to turn around and pay it off. Even though it's not being paid off, we're darting it. Why is this not a bad debt expense debit? We've already bad debted expensed it when we did the allowance for doubtful. Initially, so just like this one. We already did this once. So we've already eaten the, I think these are separate problems. I don't think they're, but we've already done this. And so if we did a bad debt expense again, it would be a double negative. Okay, and so we've already done that, so then we take this, which was a credit, and debit it instead, kind of giving back a little bit to the allowance for doubtful, or actually putting it back in AR so we can turn around and dart them. This got a little bit tricky. Did it give you a nice format there like that in the workbook? Maybe you didn't even do it. Had I been here, I would have worked through this with you. That's why I'm here and doing it now. What is the cash realizable value of the AR before the write-off and after the write-off? Okay, AR of 700,000 and allowance for doubtful of 54. So that's the before the write-off. Okay. The realistic approach here, or realizable. The realism here is that we're probably not going to get that full 700,000, and they're saying here is the liquid version of this AR, what we are going to liquefy or turn into cash. After the write-off, so we darted that one balloon of the gray account. Where did we come up with these two numbers? Well, we took the before write-off amounts minus, I think, the 6,200, yes. Which directly ties back into this. Because we took 6,200 out of allowance for doubtful and actually darted the balloon instead. Just remembering that we already did a bad debt expense on that, so we wouldn't want to do that again. This is a balloon that's been darted, gone. What can I answer there? By going through it, did it help clarify a little bit? Very good. Let's move on to brief exercise 9.5. We've got a lot to go. Assuming the same information up in the one we just did, now all of a sudden, Megan Gray pays her bill. That makes me a little bit annoyed. Why would I actually be mad and annoyed about that? We wrote her off. Come on. We sat and kicked at your door for how many months, Megan Gray? Is that her name? And now all of a sudden, 3 months later, you come crawling back to us. Well, we're also happy about it because we're getting our money. So although it takes a little bit of grunt work on the part of our AR department, and that's annoying, and time is money, we still get our money. Okay, so what do we have to do when we have darted a balloon? We actually have to reopen it. Thank you. So we have to reopen. We have to bring AR back, and we're going to put that $6,200 now back into allowance. So it was taken out, now it's back in. And then we're turning around and actually paying right away. I think an initial gut instinct, say on a test or on a problem, is that you would just do the latter of the two. Well, you can't, because had we been like tracking all of this in a ledger, we wrote her off and it's like she had a zero balance. So we had to reopen it to turn around and close it again. Yes. I know it gets so confusing. I'm going to bring it back over here. We expense it once, okay, and that's like and then allowance goes up, and then when we took it out, it went away, and now it's back, and it's just kind of one of those floating accounts that's always kind of in limbo. And it's why GAAP doesn't like direct write-off, because it makes it look super high in one year and then super low in the next year. And so that's why this write-off is very unfavorable, because exactly what you're asking, it's not as clean cut. And so even though it's like, we're done with you, and then now all of a sudden you're back. We can review. Let's maybe review. That's a really good question. I hope I answered it okay, but I still want to see what the chapter has to say about it. Let me look. I know. Well, it's the allowance is a little bit confusing. So let's take a peek. I'm going to just pause the record. Let me backtrack. Okay, to answer Ashley's question, what about the allowance account here? I'm on the bottom of page 436. The basis of estimating uncollectibles emphasizes the matching of expenses with revenues. So all the money in has a big parade of expenses behind it. As a result, bad debt expense will show a direct percentage relationship to the sales base on which it is computed. On to page 437. When the company makes the adjusting entry, it disregards the existing balance of allowance for doubtful. So it's kind of in limbo, like I just got done mentioning. It's almost like the allowance for doubtful doesn't really matter. It's just there if we need it. So I'll say that at bold print again. When the company makes the adjusting entry, so when it becomes a bad debt expense and then now we've established an allowance for doubtful, it disregards the existing balance. So it's kind of like we start over. The adjusted balance in this account should be a reasonable approximation of the realizable value of the receivable. So someone is kind of, again, I'm going to use the word hopeful when we're talking about doubtful. Someone's just kind of making a reasonable assumption on what we're going to get back. Okay. If actual write-offs differ significantly from the amount estimated, the company should modify what percentage they're using to base it off of in the future. So it's kind of up to a person to make their reasonable judgment. Now you hope this person's not shady, because here is where they could hide money in there pretty easy. So I wish it was more of a clear-cut answer, but I had a hunch that it was this gray area in the book on page 436 and 7. Re-emphasize that. So basically when we're writing off, we're just kind of saying, all right, or dart, and we got some money back. Okay, we'll just get that to cash and not do business with them anymore. I don't know if that answered your question. Okay. So, good question. On to the next part, 453. Where are we? Maybe that's it. Yes, okay. 9.6. If our company elects to use a percentage of sales basis, okay, and they have someone that's decided that over time, 2% of our net credit sales will be uncollectible. Okay. So there again, we've got this allowance for doubtful accounts. We're going to probably not see 2%. And there again, if these write-offs are occurring constantly, then maybe we need to adjust that percentage based on what the book just read to us in that paragraph, right? And maybe if they're consistently paying their bill after we harp and harp and harp a little bit, maybe we reduce that 2%. So it's again kind of an allowance for doubtful is kind of a gray in limbo type account. That is why GAAP doesn't like this. GAAP says don't throw a dart because it does make the allowance for doubtful accounts, like Ashley asked about, a juggle mess. That's why they're saying just let it fluctuate. Don't dart it. Just deflate the balloon and it will all shake out, hopefully. So notice the word net. Anytime you see the word net, that's taking into consideration all the things that offset it. So credit sales, if there have been returns, if there have been add-on extra expenses, all of that is netted into that. Sales revenue, $800,000. Returns and allowances, $40,000. Now here is where I even want you to write in your book. I'm on page 9.6, page 453. I'll read them again. Sales revenue are $800,000. Maybe just underline or circle $800,000. Sales returns and allowances are $40,000. And the allowance for doubtful accounts has a credit balance of $9,000. Underline or circle, credit balance of $9,000. Prepare the adjusting entry to record bad debt expense for 2014. Here's our net credit sales. We had $800,000 in sales minus the $40,000. What's the $40,000? What was returned? Okay. We take that times 2% because the credit manager has decided that out of that $760,000, because remember, it's not 800, at 40 came back. Out of that $760,000, we're not going to see 2% of it. Does this credit manager pull this number out of thin air? No, probably been in the industry long enough to know that that's the good going rate. Every industry is a little bit different, but whatever industry they're in, they're saying 2% we're not going to see. I'm not seeing an A and a B like my answer. Oh, we're on 9.6, sorry. Okay, that's that. Let's move on to exercise 9.7, kind of circling like what I did last time. Kingston Company uses a percentage of receivables based on basis to record bad debt. So instead of looking at what we're selling, this company looks at what our ARs are at. It estimates that 1% of accounts receivable will be uncollected. AR is $420,000, and so you're circling or underlining some of these key things at the end of the year. And the allowance for doubtful has a credit balance of $1,500. So not only are we putting a percentage on what we're not going to get, there's also a balance hanging there in that contra asset or contra AR asset account. Okay, so we're going to take 420,000, or what are called the ARs, times 1%, because that's what the credit manager says we're not going to get, minus what is hanging there in the credit balance of the allowance account, that in limbo kind of fluctuating account. Don't do the mistake I did the first time. I took 420 minus 1,500. Don't do that. It gives you a different number. Take your ARs at 1% and subtract off the credit. What do you think you'd do if you had a debit balance in the allowance for doubtful? Add it. Yes, and I think that's the next one. If the allowance for doubtful had a debit balance instead of the credit balance, what would you report as bad debt expense? So you'd still take that 420 times 1%, but this time it's a debit balance or a plus. So remember, allowance for doubtful is a contra asset account. When it's acting like an asset, we'd add it. When it's acting like a contra asset, we'd subtract it. So these are very much separate. These are very much separate. They're just saying, what if we've got a credit balance? What if we've got a debit balance? I know this is confusing, and this is why I wanted to go through this with you in person. I'm going to go back to where I drew those little T accounts. Right here. Now, you see pluses and minuses. Don't be confused by that. Okay, remember, these are contra assets. So if I had to embed those in ARs, if I had to put this credit right here, what was the number? 1,500. If this was a plus 1,500 right here, over here it would be like a minus 1,500 if I had to embed that. It's offsetting AR. On the other one, if it had a debit balance of 800, although that's pulling down the allowance account, a debit under AR would have been plus 800. You see how, and we're getting into, it's almost like it's a contra asset. A contra asset acts opposite of a normal asset, but it's almost like we're taking this negative and turning it into a positive. We had to plug it back into the AR. We'll keep doing this so you're not feeling bad about it. I hope you're starting to understand it. Boy, this one no, we have to do this one quick too. Right? No, 9-3. We've already done this one, haven't we? This is an exercise. When you when a previously written off account comes back to pay their bill. We have to take it, it's like now they're back, and we have to put it back in allowance so we can turn around and pay their bill. Because we already did the bad debt expense. Good question. I don't think I ever assigned this one. Did I? No. I don't know why that one's there. Okay. These are for another day. Now, have we done everything? No. Am I missing one? Am I missing 9-8? Okay, I'm not seeing that in my list. These are all for later. I'll peek. Brief exercise 9-8, and then you just did all the ratio ones yesterday, right? Yes. For the folks that emailed me, thank you. You had very thought-provoking emails. Whether you just copy and pasted it online or you truly thought about it, thank you. I want to do the ratios quick, and then I can go back and show you exercise 9-8. I don't have it in this PowerPoint. I thought this section was easy. That's the one I recorded when I wasn't feeling very good from home. And if you understood the inventory ratios a couple chapters back, this made a lot of sense, okay? The feeling I got from you in your emails is that the higher this number is, the better. The more times we're turning over that inventory, or the ARs. That's what most of you said in the emails that you sent me yesterday. So you take your, let me just double check here. Basically, you take your AR, your net AR, and divide it by your average AR. So your beginning plus ending. Of course, dividing by 2 gives you your average to figure out how many times you are turning over those ARs. You roll this number down here and take 365 divided by the number of times to find out how many days it's actually taking to do that. What can I answer there? Second one you did, asked for a little bit more information. They basically said, instead of just being given numbers, you had to go hunt for them a little bit. So what was your beginning AR? And here's your ending AR, which those two numbers you're going to need to figure out your average. Credit sales of $1 million minus collections that came in minus accounts that were darted or written off got to the 150. I want to see how you were presented this in the book. Exercise 9. To then figure out how many times we take the credit sales of $1 million divided by, so here's your credit sales, or AR. So the sales that we made that were not cash-based, but rather were charged. And you took your beginning AR plus your ending AR, which wasn't given to you. That's what made this hard. So 100,000 plus 150,000. Average that, so divide it by 2. this particular scenario, you're turning over your ARs 8 times, which equivalates into the 365 divided by 8 every 45.6 days. And like I talked about on the video yesterday, you want to shoot for that month. That 30 days is optimal, but adding on 15 days of the bill being sent and then the check being sent back, that's 30 to 45, even 30 to 60 days, if you can get it in that range, is pretty good. The tricky part, of course, was this top part. And I hope by just showing it to you helps. So the only thing I need to show you is the answer to brief exercise 9.8. Is that correct? I must have had the wrong one in. Again, I'm going to hit pause. Okay, so here you see a brief exercise 9.8. Sorry, it's not in the original format that you're used to. It's just my answer key. It's basically taking a look at credit card sales. So the reason although we had $175 in sales revenue, the reason we didn't get to keep all of it is because there was a expense of $7 or 4% of our credit sales that the card basically kept. I want to compare this to what I use in my Junk by Jenny business for credit card sales. I use the little square. It's like a little plug-in that goes into an Apple device that customers swipe their card. Okay, the actual square reader for me is free. They just take a percentage of every sale that I make that I don't even see. So from an expense perspective, that's what I do. Although I might sell $175 worth of stuff, my bank is only giving me $168 because Square is going to take a percentage. They take it. That's how they basically have their services paid for. So sometimes when you go to like little pop-up shops or boutiques or small businesses, they're going to tell you you need X amount of dollars to even have a credit sale. Have you seen that before? Where you must have a minimum of $5 charge to even swipe your card. Have you guys seen that? Even in gas stations, I've seen that a little bit. Because they have to pay such a high percentage to have the card swiping happen. Down below, it looks like, I better just read it because I remember reading it, but. Larkin Company sold its accounts receivable for $60,000. What should Larkin enter given a 3% service charge? Who did they sell it to? Why would you sell an AR? Sick of dealing with it? You sell it to a factor. Most factors include like a bank or like a shark type business that's willing to take on bad debt risks. But it usually comes with a service charge of some sort. So although we sold a $60,000 AR to a factor, we only got $58,200 because they charged, in this case, 3% to take on that risk. Woo! We did it. Admittedly, the allowance bit is still fuzzy. Would you like me to show you one more of those problems tomorrow when we start? Just to say, okay, here's these T accounts, here's how it works. I'll look for a couple more of those when there's a debit balance, when there's a credit balance. To answer Ashley's question again, to answer Ira's question about when would there be a debit balance, I can sure do that with you. Tomorrow then, of course it being Friday, and most of you coming back from an exciting night over in, is it Marshall? So we'll go easy. But I will review all this. Not all of it, but I'll review the muddy stuff. And then I'll lecture on that one middle section. I think you'll find it to be easy because it's about loans. It's about principal times rate times time. I talk about it in other classes. You're likely an owner of a loan already. Maybe not if you've bought a car, different stuff. So I'll talk about that tomorrow.